The moment Victor Harlan laughed, the whole table laughed with him. That was how it always worked. Victor laughed first, and the room followed. His wife, his son, the neighbors he'd invited over, even the 2 men from the church council who were there for Sunday dinner, they all took their cues from him. They always had. What he was laughing at was his daughter. Specifically, he was laughing at the way Marcus Devlin, his son Cole's best friend, a man who had just flown in from Washington, D.C., and was standing in the Harlans' living room in Abilene, Texas, holding a bottle of Scotch whiskey as a host gift, had asked what Nora did for work. Victor had been the one to answer. "Oh, Nora!" He'd waved his hand the way he always did when the subject came up, loose at the wrist, a little dismissive flick. "She works in an office somewhere. Something with numbers. Nothing exciting." Nora Harlan was standing 6 feet away when he said it. She was holding a dish towel because she'd been the one to cook the roast that was currently on the table, and she'd just come out of the kitchen to say hello. She heard every word. She didn't correct him. She'd stopped correcting him a long time ago. Marcus had smiled politely, the way guests do when they sense they've wandered into the edge of something they don't fully understand, and said, "Numbers, huh? What kind of office?" Victor had already moved on, steering Marcus toward the bar cart. "Come on, let me pour you something. Cole tells me you're at state now, that right?" And that was that. Nora went back to the kitchen. She finished slicing the roast. She brought out the bread rolls and the green beans and the gravy, and she set them all on the table, and she sat down at the far end next to her mother, who patted her hand and said quietly, "It smells wonderful, sweetheart." And that was the only acknowledgement anyone gave her for the 2.5 hours she'd spent in that kitchen. This was a Sunday in March. Nora was 31 years old. She had been a federal judge for 4 months. The appointment had come through in November, which meant Nora had spent Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's and her mother's birthday and 2 family dinners since then, carrying this information inside her chest like something breakable, waiting for the right moment to tell her father. She wasn't sure why she kept waiting. She told herself it was because she wanted to do it in person, not over the phone. She told herself she was choosing her moment carefully. What she was actually doing, if she was honest, and Nora was almost always honest, it was one of the things people either admired about her or found deeply inconvenient, was dreading his reaction. Not because she thought he would be dismissive, because she thought he would be proud in exactly the wrong way. He would make it about himself. He would say something like, "Well, that's the Harlan stubbornness coming through," or "I always knew one of my kids would do something impressive." And he would tell the story to his friends and the church council and everyone at the country club, and somewhere in the telling, Nora would disappear from it. The achievement would become a Harlan family achievement. Victor Harlan's daughter, the judge. Not Nora. Not the woman who had put herself through law school, on scholarships and loans and weekend paralegal work, who had clerked for a circuit court judge in Houston while living in a studio apartment with a window that faced a brick wall, who had spent 8 years building a reputation, one case at a time, in a city where she knew no one and had no connections and no one opening any doors for her. She was 31, and she'd done all of it by herself. The least she wanted was for the story to be told right. But there was also another reason she hadn't said anything, one she didn't examine too closely on most days. The truth was that Nora had spent most of her life waiting for her father to see her. Really see her, past the version of her he'd constructed in his mind sometime around when she was 12 and a little overweight and more interested in books than the things her prettier, more social younger sister Rachel had been interested in, and she had never quite managed to stop waiting, even though she was old enough to know better. The waiting had become so familiar it had started to feel like part of her. She carried it the same way she carried her driver's license and her courthouse badge and the worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. She kept in her bag even though she had it mostly memorized by now. Just always there. Victor Harlan loved his children. She had never doubted that. He was a man who coached Little League and gave to the church building fund and drove 3 hours to help a friend move furniture. He was not a cruel man. He was just a man who had decided, at some point so long ago, that he probably no longer remembered making the decision that Nora was the quiet one, the plain one, the practical one, the one who was fine. Rachel was the one people worried about and celebrated and discussed. Rachel, who was beautiful and volatile, and had married a man their father adored, and then divorced him, and then adopted 2 dogs and moved to Portland and called home, crying at least twice a month. Rachel required attention. Rachel required managing. Nora, who was steady and competent and never called home crying, did not. Cole was the son. Cole got the full beam of his father's pride simply by existing, and Marcus Devlin, apparently, got to hear about his career in the State Department in the first 5 minutes of arriving, while Nora got she works in an office somewhere. She ate her pot roast. She refilled her mother's water glass. She listened to her father tell Marcus about Cole's new promotion and Rachel's latest crisis and the addition they were planning to put on the back of the house. She answered questions when someone asked her one, which wasn't often. She was, as she had learned to be in this house, patient. The thing about patience is that it is sometimes mistaken for acceptance. It was Cole who finally said something, and not on purpose. They had moved to the living room after dinner. Nora was helping her mother clear the table. Her mother, Barbara, was 63 and had a bad hip that she refused to do anything about, and would wave off any offered sympathy by saying, "Oh, I'm fine," in a tone that made it clear the conversation was over, and Cole was showing Marcus something on his phone when Nora came through to collect the gravy boat. She wasn't paying attention to their conversation. She was thinking about whether there was enough room in her bag for the leftover rolls she'd promised to take to her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who was 80 and lived alone and had recently mentioned that she missed good bread. "Yeah, Nora's always been the quiet one," Cole was saying. "Smart, but, she's never really had the personality for anything high profile." She stopped walking. She wasn't sure Cole knew she was there. She thought probably he didn't. He had his back half turned, and he was still looking at his phone, and he said it with the easy, uncomplicated carelessness of someone stating a fact so familiar they'd stopped thinking about it. The same way you'd say the kitchen's on the left or she takes her coffee black. He wasn't being unkind. He believed it. He had believed it for so long he didn't question it anymore. Marcus glanced up. His eyes found Nora across the room, standing with the gravy boat in her hands, and something in his expression shifted. Not embarrassment. Something more careful than that, more attentive. He had been watching her all evening, she realized now, quietly, the way someone watches when they're trying to work something out. "What does Nora actually do?" he asked Cole. "I didn't catch it earlier." Cole shrugged. "Finance, I think, or accounting? Something like that. She's at some federal agency downtown." Nora set the gravy boat down on the side table. She did it gently, which took some effort. "I'm a federal judge," she said. The room went quiet the way a room does when everyone in it suddenly recalibrates. Cole looked up from his phone. Her father lowered his drink. Her mother, coming in from the kitchen with a stack of dessert plates, stopped in the doorway. "I was appointed in November," Nora said. "I've been on the bench since January. I have a docket and a clerk and a courtroom. United States District Court, Western District of Texas." She picked the gravy boat back up because she still needed to take it to the kitchen, and she was still going to do that. "I've been trying to find the right time to mention it. This seemed like as good a time as any." She walked back to the kitchen. She ran the water. She rinsed the gravy boat. Through the door she could hear her father saying something, but she couldn't make out the words over the tap, and she found that she didn't particularly want to. It was Marcus who came to find her. He appeared in the kitchen doorway and leaned against the frame and said, "Your Honor," in a tone that was dry and not mocking, just acknowledging, like he was testing the weight of it. "You don't have to call me that," she said. "I know." He paused. "How long have they not known?" "Since November. That's 4 months. I'm aware of how long November to March is." He almost smiled. She saw the edge of it. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" She thought about the honest answer and decided he'd earned it, because he had asked directly and she respected directness. "Because when I told them," she said, "I wanted it to be about me, not about them, not about the family. I wanted the story to be mine for at least a minute before it became something my father told at the club." She turned off the tap and set the gravy boat on the dish rack. "And I suppose I also didn't want to see the look on my father's face when he had to decide whether to be proud of something he'd never once predicted." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I work in the office of the legal advisor," he said. "State Department. I know most of the federal judges in this circuit. By reputation, at least." He stopped. "I know your reputation." She turned around and looked at him. He was watching her with that same careful attention from before. Not like someone admiring a curiosity. Like someone who had been trying to figure out where a piece belonged and had just found the right place for it. "The Alderman ruling," he said. "Last month. That was you." The Alderman case had been her second month on the bench. A jurisdictional dispute that had been bouncing between courts for 3 years and had landed on her docket almost by accident. She'd spent 4 weeks on the decision. She was proud of it. "That was me," she said. "I read it twice," he said. "Half the department read it." There was a conversation in a meeting I was in where someone cited it, and the deputy secretary said, he paused, seemed to decide how to finish the sentence. She said whoever wrote it has a mind like a scalpel. Nora was quiet. That's you, Marcus said. That's the person standing in this kitchen. She heard her father's voice from the living room, louder now, trying to recover the thread of the evening. He was asking Barbara something about dessert. He was being cheerful about it, which was how he handled things that made him uncomfortable. He talked louder and changed the subject, and trusted that the volume would fill in for the thing he wasn't saying. He would come around, eventually. She knew him well enough to know that. By next week, he'd have told 3 people about his daughter, the federal judge, and by next month, he'd have refined it into a story he was proud of. And somewhere in that process, the 4 months of silence, and the she works in an office somewhere, and she never had the personality for anything high profile would get smoothed out, the way inconvenient things always got smoothed out when they didn't fit the version of the story you wanted to tell. She couldn't be angry about that. She'd tried being angry and it never held, but she could be honest. She could keep being the person who corrected the gravy boat and told the truth when someone asked and did not apologize for taking up the amount of space she actually took up, which was, it turned out, a fair amount. More than something with numbers, more than she's the quiet one, more than the seat at the far end of the table next to the gravy that nobody asked who made it. Cole appeared in the kitchen doorway behind Marcus. His expression was doing something complicated that she recognized. He was trying to figure out what he was supposed to feel and had not yet landed on it. Nora, he said. I didn't know. I know you didn't. I wouldn't have. He stopped. He was a good person, her brother. He was not bad, just inattentive the way people are when they've never had to pay attention. I'm sorry. What I said out there. She looked at him. She didn't make it easy or hard. She just looked at him until he understood she meant it when she said, thank you. He nodded. He went back to the living room. Marcus was still in the doorway. Are you going back out there? He asked. In a minute. She reached for the stack of dessert plates her mother had left on the counter and began to count them. 8. She'd need to get the 9th from the cabinet. The pie's been in the warmer for 40 minutes. Any longer and the crust goes soggy. He stepped into the kitchen and reached past her for the cabinet, handed her the 9th plate without being asked. I didn't know, he said quieter now, that you were the Nora Harlan. When Cole talked about you, I thought, I don't know what I thought. Something with numbers. She took the plate. I am something with numbers, she said. Evidence numbers, case numbers, statute numbers, federal code, Title 28. She picked up the stack. Also, I make a very good pot roast. He laughed. A real one, not a polite one. She noted the difference. Dinner the second time, dessert, technically was not the same as the first. Her father was quieter than usual, which for Victor Harlan was its own kind of loud. He asked Nora questions. Careful ones, the way a man asks questions when he's aware he's been in the wrong and doesn't quite know the shape of it yet. She answered them. She was not cold and she was not warm. She was what she always was, direct, clear, exact. Yes, she'd been on the bench since January. Yes, it was a lifetime appointment. Yes, she had been sworn in. No, she hadn't told them because she wanted to wait until she could do it in person. Yes, she was fine. She was in fact more than fine. Her mother held her hand twice under the table and said nothing either time. Some things Barbara said best by not saying anything. Marcus left at 9 with the leftover scotch, which Victor pressed on him. He shook hands with Cole, kissed Barbara on the cheek, and then he stopped in front of Nora. He said, "It was a real privilege, Your Honor." She held out her hand. He shook it. "You'll get a parking ticket if you leave a government vehicle on that street after 9, she said, because she had noticed the plates when he pulled up and she noticed things. She couldn't help it. She noticed everything. He grinned, noted. He left. She listened to his car pull out of the driveway. Her father, from his armchair, cleared his throat. "You should have told us," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "I should have." There was a silence that had the shape of something her father wanted to say and hadn't decided how to say yet. She waited. She was good at waiting. She'd had a lot of practice. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. The words came out a little stiff, like they'd been in the wrong drawer and taken some effort to locate. But they were real. She could tell real from performed. It was, professionally speaking, one of her more essential skills. "Thank you, Dad," she said. She helped her mother do the last of the dishes. She wrapped up the remaining rolls for Mrs. Chen. She hugged her parents goodbye at the door, the same way she always did, and she drove home through the flat nighttime streets of Abilene with the windows down and the radio off. She didn't think about the dinner. She thought about the Kellerman case waiting on her desk Monday morning. which had a procedural wrinkle she hadn't quite untangled yet. She thought about Mrs. Chen and whether the rolls would still be warm enough to matter. She thought about the alderman ruling and a mind like a scalpel, and she let herself carry that for a few miles without putting it down. She was not the quiet one. She had never been the quiet one. She had been the patient one, which was different. And patience, it turned out, had its own kind of power, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't need the room to follow, that simply waits for the moment when the truth becomes too large to be talked over, and then stands there, plain and steady and entirely itself. She pulled into her driveway. She turned off the engine. She sat for a moment in the dark, and then she picked up the rolls and went inside.